Baby boomers, people in their 50s and 60s are taking out debt to send their kids to college. Is that wise or unwise? I'm not sure. Hello and welcome to the Happy Money Podcast. My name is Gino Barbaro, one of the co-founders of Barbaro 360, a company that is dedicated to changing the world one family at a time. And I am joined by my son and co-host Michael Barbaro. Michael, how are you today?
Doing well, Dad. How you doing?
I'm doing great, brother. What are we talking about today?
Number one big question, should we go to college in this day and age?
Number one big question. Would you like my answer?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Real quick. I don't want to sound like an attorney, but it depends. And I think as we go through this, the show and we start talking about it, it really does depend upon a person's situation. And it's not one blanket statement where it's yes or no. I think the biggest thing though, Michael, is it depends from a perspective of ROI, a return on investment. Mm-hmm. That's what I view college. And that's what I think everybody listening should really view college. You're putting money and spending money to go to school. What is the expectation? What is the result that education can provide for you? So if you're looking at it from a return on investment perspective, that will give you a much, I think, clearer answer to that question.
Definitely. I think what's interesting is that you say ROI and we think an investment on education. Apart from college, people really don't spend more than $5,000 or $10,000 on education, let alone $60,000 to $100,000.
Why is that?
It's a really good question. I don't have the full answer to that, but I think it's this, we've been doing it for so many years to where it's been, there's like this implant in our brains that says we got to go into student debt. We got to have the college experience. And no one really seems to know why. Like, why are we spending 60 to 100 grand a year to basically just go and party? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
It's this whole kind of community-based outlet when in fact, you could spend a lot less on a community college, form a great group of friends there, and save yourself the trouble 20 years down the road.
So as we're going to go through the show today, let's talk about a few things that I really want to focus on, and I know you want to focus on. Let's talk about the alternatives. Let's really break it down to say, is it a good idea or is it a bad idea? The pros and the cons. Mm-hmm. And I want to share some numbers right now with you because some of these numbers really are truly staggering. And I think if we share the numbers, it'll give a person a perspective and to say, wow, am I part of that? Or how do I avoid being one of those, I would say, casualties? Mm-hmm. 43 million borrowers, $1.6 trillion in student debt. The average student debt is $38,375. Gen X is the highest on average with $44,240. That's my generation.
Yeah.
People in their 40s and 50s still have an average of $44,000 in student debt.
Why do you think that is, real quick? What are your thoughts?
Because remember the last podcast we did? The borrower is slave to the lender.
Correct.
I think it's just part of the American experience where, hey, I've got debt here, I've got debt here, and you become sloppy. Benjamin Franklin says that even a small leak will sink a ship. And think about your financial perspective. People have a lot of small leaks. Mm-hmm. Oh, it's only a couple $100 for student debt. Oh, it's only a couple $100 for a cell phone. Oh, it's only a couple $100 for Ring and Netflix. All of a sudden, couples hundreds of bucks adds up to thousands of dollars a month.
Definitely.
I think that's what happens. Let me keep going with these stats before you jump in. 1 in 4 adults under the age of 40 has student loans. More than 50% of students are laced with student debt. 92% are federal loans. And 40% of all borrowers do not have a degree. That's the worst.
That's scary. That's
Isn't
horrible.
It? Talk about your experience when you went to college.
My experience was very straightforward. I knew what degree I wanted going in. I had a general understanding, and that's kind of all you really need is a general understanding of what I was going to go into. Obviously, I wanted to do business, so I had 3 main options: business admin, finance, or accounting. I started with finance because that was your degree years ago. I like spreadsheets. I like numbers. I like real estate. It made sense at the time for me to go into finance. Probably 2 or 3 years down the road, I took an accounting minor on, realized this is great. I can learn the ins and outs of a business more so with accounting. So I took that as a minor. 6 months to a year later, the professors finally convinced me, just take up the major, man. And so I finally did.
Really?
So I double majored in finance and accounting.
Would you have done that now, looking back? Would you have gone back to college looking back at it now?
If I was starting at 18, it would make sense for me to do it again. Right now, as I am, I probably wouldn't do it right now. There's different options out there. Because one thing college did for me is I was at home for college, as you probably know, and it gave me a good foundation of what a daily life should look like. And that was one of the things. And also, we could afford it. That's the main thing as well, right? Because if I couldn't afford it, I just wasn't going to do it. It didn't make sense.
So I have to step in there real quick. We could afford it. You and I, we had that discussion. Is like, I wanted you to go for several reasons, selfishly. And as a parent, you don't want to pressure your child to do it. But I left it open to you. Hey, if you don't want to go, I understand. The one caveat that I find difficult nowadays is when you have your child who's 17 or 18 years old, and all of a sudden they leave the house and they go into this school. To me, it doesn't feel natural. It's like you're leaving the home, especially your homeschool. You don't have that kind of structure. And then all of a sudden you're thrown into a group that you've never been. You're far away from home and you're just expected to grow up. And there's so many different types of pressure, the peer pressure from friends, the pressure from going to school, new surroundings. So for us, you staying at home, going to a private university, that wasn't even that expensive. It was actually reasonable.
Private university now.
Right. It was actually very reasonable. That was the other thing. And then obviously also you got some scholarship money, which helped us as well.
Helps.
You stayed at home, so there was no food and board. So that saved us a lot of money. And for me, selfishly, I didn't want to be the one to teach you statement of cash flows and balance sheets and income statements. So that was always in the back of my mind. I didn't think of sending you to go to be an employee. I really wanted you to learn the world of business, not just for myself, but from a structure. And I think that accomplished it because I remember seeing you do your accounting homework, debits, credits, statement of cash flows, assets, liabilities, owner's equity. A lot of these terms that you see in business now, I think you're exposed to them in college in a good way.
Definitely. And being both finance and accounting, you really do get best of both worlds. You get the whole accounting side and then the whole finance side as well, which was great. You get portfolio and asset management. You learn the risk and return. You learn all kinds of different stock markets information there.
I'm looking at your notes. Talk to me about some of the lessons or some of those classes that you took that were an absolute waste of money. And Michael, more importantly, if you're thinking about it and you don't have the money, but you're forced to take these classes, should you consider maybe not going or picking a different school or holding off until you can afford them?
As I was writing my script down for this, my kind of PowerPoint notes or whatever it was, I'm thinking there's probably 2 or 3 classes that I didn't really need to take. I went through my transcript and I realized it was about 10 or 11.
Not that you didn't want to take them. You just
complete waste of time.
Yeah.
It's like I took like one history course I took, for example. I don't remember anything from that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's like I'd already done that beforehand, but the college tells you, hey, you got to take this because this is somehow related to what you want to go into. But it's at the end of the day, it's like I got to pay $2,500 for a class that I'm not going to use in the real world ever. I don't remember anything from it, but I still got to pay for it to get my degree to be able to work in finance and accounting. Mm-hmm. And then multiply that by 10. That's 25 grand in classes right there.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of freaking money.
So when you think about it, you can afford to do that, right? Mm-hmm. And looking at it from the long term, your return on investment on that $25,000 really is the degree down the road.
Correct.
But it's one of those things where possibly if we had known that, you could have gone and done dual enrollment and gone to community college before you went to college, where in Florida, they have this dual enrollment where if you're a junior in high school, you can start taking college courses. And maybe those college courses that you don't want to take that are going to be a waste, like a history, like an art class, or like a drawing class, maybe you can do that before you go to college.
And it won't be as expensive. It'll be, I think in the state of Florida, last I checked, it's free for high schoolers.
It's free. It is. So that's something that's something where you can do. Now you have over here, we're preparing for the show. You're talking about some other options. Let's say you don't want to go to college. What are some of the other options that you can do if you don't want to?
There's a lot of options like trade school. I know people that have just kind of skimmed over college. Maybe they did a few classes here and there, but they just went into some kind of trade school, electricians, plumbers, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. You've got plenty of certifications out there. I know of one girl, I don't remember if she did a 4-year degree or not, but she went through a program, did a 10 or 12-week certification, something along those lines, and is now making like 60 or 70 grand a year as a saleswoman. And so there's so many different things you can do. You don't need to go through this traditional 4-year degree anymore because there's other options out there.
But Michael, what about if you do want to become a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer? Then,
those are a little different.
Then the options are limited.
That's a little bit different, of course. But even with that, the salary of those jobs is often enough to outweigh the cost of your student loans. Because eventually down the road, you're going to be making $300,000-$400,000 as a doctor. Your student loans are going to be significantly high. But if you know how to do it right, you can pay that off with a much higher salary.
But you're looking at it from a return on an investment perspective.
Exactly.
You have $300,000 in student debt, but you're making $200,000 or $300,000. It's still a significant amount of money.
Correct.
But we know that people with bachelor's degrees tend to earn more money. That's the reality.
Yes,
people with master's degrees tend to earn a lot more money. Now you're looking at that, Mike, and you're saying to yourself, okay, I want to become a doctor or a lawyer. From the student's perspective, what about just taking a year off from high school and working and saving some money?
That's a great idea. One person I was talking to recently, she had done just that. She was like, I wanted to do this other opportunity. I wasn't going to make much money from it. And so I wanted to save, work for a year, save up money, and then go doing this thing. And it's kind of that same mentality of going to school. Instead of taking on debt, you just work, you build up the savings, and then you can be able to pay it off in the moment. So you're not stuck with this kind of, what do I do with this debt? How do I balance out the monthly payments and that kind of stuff? That makes sense?
Yeah. Money isn't just about numbers. It's about the life you build, the family you strengthen, and the legacy you leave behind. In Happy Money, Happy Family, Happy Legacy, you'll discover how to align your finances with what truly matters, building a life of peace, security, and purpose. Because wealth isn't just what's in your bank account, it's the impact you leave behind. Get your copy today and start creating a legacy that lasts.
Yeah.
And you remember we were reading also about student debt and what it does to credit scores.
Oh, yeah.
After 90 days, now they're starting to go to the reporting agencies. So it's one of the things you need to think of. And I think parents and their children need to sit down and have a serious conversation about, this is the amount of money we need to take out. Are there other ways? Are there scholarships? Are there grants? Is there financial aid? Working on all of that and seeing exactly what that number looks like. And then obviously trying to reverse engineer and go back and see what it's going to cost you. And then when you do get out of school, how much debt do you have and what does your monthly payment look like? And can you afford that monthly payment?
Exactly.
That's the important part.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what would you change about college?
So it comes down to, right, if I'm going to major in something like finance, accounting, business, or marketing or something like that, is it necessary for me to take classes completely unrelated to what my degree is going to be in? Is it necessary for those classes to be in place? Because if there's a way we can kind of change that mentality of, I'm going to spend, instead of spending 25 grand on classes that I don't need, how about changing the curriculum to where there's more classes that fit my major, or just take them out altogether and make it for, people can be able to afford college a little bit more.
Do you think there's schools out there that will start going to that model? I mean, I'm sure there's some online schools that may be going to that model. So that may be something where people may go online and say, hey, I'm going to do something virtual, all online. You don't get the quote unquote college experience, but you are getting the degree, based on the amount of time that you can put in, based on your time frame, and based on the cost being a lot less. Those are some factors that are really important.
Well, it's interesting. I was looking into a master's program a little while ago, and it's kind of structured like you just said. There's no real classes that are a waste of time. Everything meets the criteria of what you need to know for this field. And so now it just comes down to, how can we apply that to undergrad? Is there a whole separate degree even that we can take that says, hey, this person completed all of their, courses they need for this degree, but they did not complete their general education, so to speak. If that makes sense.
It does. The problem that I see with student debt in college is, years ago, when I went to college, mom paid for me, room and board. I went to Fairfield University. It cost, back in 1989, 1990, I think $17,000 for tuition, room and board. I think Fairfield University now, don't quote me, it's probably about 70 grand a year. So what I paid for 4 years, it's close to 1 year. Now you say to yourself, inflation, wages got up that much? No. What's happened is student debt has made it so much easier, that buy now, pay later mentality.
Exactly.
That's the biggest problem that I see with student debt, is that they are, federal government and all these programs with student debt, they're actually subsidizing. And when you're young and you're 18 years old, you're not thinking about 4 years later when you graduate college.
No.
The other issue is that this debt is riskier debt, and you tend to pay much higher interest rates. That's the other issue. So this debt is very expensive. So for me, as I'm looking at, I'm the parent, I'm going to give my synopsis or my understanding of how I'm going to rank it for my children to give them some kind of wisdom. And then I want your take on it. If I'm an adult, I'm going to look at the child. I'm going to say, is Michael serious about what he's going to major in? Does he have an understanding, or is he just going to try to find himself? Number one. Number two, is he going to put in the hard work? Does he value the money that I'm spending on the education? And so far, all of those questions that I asked myself about you was, yes, he was a hard worker. He knew what he wanted to do. He was structured. He put in the time. He got great grades. So that's checks all the boxes. The next thing for me is it a financial burden for us and for the family? I did not want to take on debt to go to college. So I started saving earlier on in my career. And then unfortunately for us, we started investing in apartments. Those apartments, the cash flow literally paid for you to go to college. So from the financial standpoint, I was like, great, I'm not burdening myself, because right now, baby boomers are taking out student debt to send their kids to college. Let me say that again.
That's crazy.
Baby boomers, people in their 50s and 60s, are taking out debt to send their kids to college. Is that wise or unwise? I'm not sure. I just don't want to be in my late 50s having to burden myself with debt that is going to allow my child to go to college. So it's one of those things. Maybe my child goes to junior college for a couple of years and then can pay. So once again, that's the framework that I'm working on, the pros and the cons. I could afford it. You were really motivated. You knew what you wanted. The return on my investment was really good because you went to a good private college. Yes, you didn't overpay. You enjoyed it. You made some really great quality friends there. I like the people that you met there. I like the groups that you were involved in. So this is from the parents' perspective. Yeah. Like, those are the boxes that I'm checking. You were close to the home. You were able to live at home. Unfortunately, I had to buy you a car, so I could afford that as well. But I'd rather buy you a car. Exactly. And you still have that car.
And you're still going
to drive it, right? So those are the things as a parent I'm looking at. As a young adult, what should be on your mind to see, should I go to college or should I defer and put it off?
Basically, like you said, like, first thing is, what's your degree? If you're going to go to some private university and spend $50,000 a year to get a theology degree and just kind of be like, I'm just going to go find myself, that doesn't really work in the real world. You're going to get crushed in 4 years when you got to basically work 3 different jobs just to make your monthly payment and basically just make ends meet. So that's number one. I'm going into with a business major, right? What's my next step? Right? Where do I actually see myself? What do I enjoy? Right? Because if you're going to go into accounting and you hate everything about accounting, you don't like taxes, you don't like anything to do with auditing, you don't even enjoy debits and credits, the basic stuff, you probably shouldn't go into accounting. But if you like business, maybe you can kind of go back to business admin there and see, what do I enjoy interacting with people? Do I enjoy the HR kind of stuff? Do I enjoy managing people? Once you kind of figure that out, then you just got to go for it and take some classes. Like, your first year of college is basically going to be, what do I even like? And once you kind of get over that stage, then comes the next part of actually finalizing and saying, this is what I actually want to go into. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm going to ask you a tough question. What about if you're a young adult and there's peer pressure? All my friends are going to college. I need to go because if I don't, I feel like I'm dumb. What do you say to that person?
The person who questions peer pressure is significantly more intelligent than his peers. That's number one, right?
Yes.
And so if you can question it, that's the first step, right? Do I need to go to college, right? Is this going to help me? And then you got to ask yourself, is this going to help my friends? Do they even know what they want to do? And if they're going because to college because they're all pressuring each other, right? Then that might be the time to say, hey, maybe I'm the one that's actually right in the situation, and then to act on that, right?
How did you decide that you wanted to go to college? How did you come up with that decision?
It was very straightforward. It was, you're going to pay, obviously. If I was going to go to Flagler myself, I wouldn't have gone and take on student debt. I would have gone to the local community college. And so that was a big thing for me. But I did know that I wanted to get higher education of some kind. I felt like that would have benefited me as a person overall. But again, I didn't need to go to Flagler for that. And I could have gone to St. John's down the street and just taken out I'm trying to remember the actual price. I think it's $6,000 a year, which is significantly less than a private school.
Yeah, a lot less.
So that would have been a huge less burden for me overall.
And I want to go back to the question that I asked you about if you're a young adult with that peer pressure. I'm going to reverse picture and say, what about if you're a parent who feels that peer pressure to have to send their kid to college because society says that you have to do that. If your kid doesn't go to college, then you're a failure as a parent. Or even worse, up in New York, if you're sending your kid to a state school, people would think that you're poor. And that's really challenging for a lot of us who, self-esteem issues. Like my kid didn't get into college. I can't believe he's not going to school. That makes me look bad as a parent. And I would say to parents, we all have those feelings. What you need to do is to sit down and really to pray. and to pray and ask God what's the best thing for your child, not what's the best thing for your self-esteem or the best thing to make you look good. What's the best thing for your kid? Like, do you think your kid's going to succeed and excel in college? Do you think that's where they should be? And if it is, then give a gentle nudge and say, I think this is where you should be. But if you don't think so, or they don't want to go, then you shouldn't be pressuring them.
Mm-hmm.
Then you shouldn't be forcing them to go. And that was a hard lesson for me, because I've got friends, family members, the peer pressure of, oh, where's your kid going to college next year? And sometimes it's a little, I don't want to say scary, but I feel a little bad saying, well, I'm not really, and it's one of those things where we have to work on as parents. It's not what's in our best interest. It's what is in our child's best interest. And I think if we can do that and think about that, that'll serve our kids so much better.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you say from the parent's point of view, I think one of the biggest things humans struggle with is the so-called how does everyone perceive I am as a person, right?
Yes.
As you kind of said. I think that's the biggest thing. Learning to master that. But it's this excess sense of vanity of, oh, everyone thinks I need to do it this way, therefore I have to do it this way. Otherwise I look like an idiot. But that's just simply not the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you know what's best for yourself and for your kid, and you don't do that, I would say that's much worse than giving in to your friends who say your kids should go to college.
Yeah, I agree. So after we've been talking about this for around 20 minutes, the answer still is, it depends. Right?
Always.
And it's interesting because you haven't swayed me one way or the other. I think looking at it rationally and logically, you always want to look at it from an economic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to materially benefit down the road? Are you going to make more money? Are you going to get a return on your money? Now, if you're thinking about, yeah, I'm going to earn more money, but I'm going to be laden with student debt, and that student debt down the road is going to give me less options. I may want to travel for 6 months, or I may not want to get a job right away. But if I got student debt, I don't have that optionality.
Exactly.
These are things that we need to talk about with our children. And as adults, we need to put that in the grand scheme of things when we're making decisions. So I'm going to really try to wrap this up from my perspective. Then I want you to wrap it up from your perspective. For me, it comes down to return on investment, comes down to list the pros and the cons. And as a parent, try to do the best thing for you, not for me. Try to do the best thing for the child. Mm-hmm. Put the child's interests at heart, and try not to put them ultimately into a financial burden. And please try not to put yourself in a huge financial burden just to send them to school to make yourself look or feel better.
Definitely. And just kind of going back to what I said originally, always go in with a plan. Have a general understanding of what you want to go into. If you like engineering, probably should go into something, you don't have to decide immediately, but something along those lines. If you want to go into business, have an understanding of finance and accounting and just business in general, watch a couple of videos, see if it interests you, go from there. Because you shouldn't take on like a theology degree thinking, oh, maybe I'll change the business, but I want to, you know what I mean? It's kind of a waste of time. And like you said, the financial burden is such an important aspect, because you got to remember down the road, it's going to come back and hit us in the head. I
always heard from one of my mentors, you either pay now or you pay later.
You pay later.
You either pay when
you pay a lot more later.
You either pay when you're planting the seed or you're gathering the harvest. It's always better to pay when you're planting the seed, because you know exactly what it's going to cost. We don't know how long the harvest is going to be or how much money it's going to cost when the harvest. So if you can try to pay right away, right now and then, it's a much better idea.
I agree.
Michael and I want to thank you for spending part of your day with us. This is such a difficult topic to discuss, and we're just trying to have a candid conversation between a father and a son from an adult's perspective and from a young adult's perspective. So once again, thanks for spending time with us. Go visit us at barbaro360.com, and we'll see you on the next Happy Money Show.